Business Skills 360, the podcast that looks at the other side of business English. Welcome back to the Skills 360 podcast. I'm your host, Tim Simmons, and today I want to help you organize your ideas. Before we get into that, I'd like to let you know that our Business English app for the iPhone and iPad is now available in the App Store. The app comes packed with over 100 great lessons from Business English Pod, including all our Skills 360 lessons. And the best news of all, it's free to download. Just head over to businessenglishpod.com for the App Store link. So, back to ideas. Sure, you've got lots of them. And sure, they're important to you. But are they important to others? Well, they could be, but only if they're clear and organized. You've probably been frustrated when people run on at length about what they think, using vague language. And you've probably tuned out when someone jumps around chaotically from idea to idea without tying it all together for a purpose. That just doesn't work. And sometimes it's not the best ideas that win, but the ones that are most clearly articulated. But exactly how can we do this? Ideas can be very wild animals. They don't always come into our heads in an organized manner. Sometimes they don't seem to come into our heads at all. And they don't just get together in their own groups and organize themselves. So we need to generate them, tame them, and get them into usable form. Today, we'll look at a few different frameworks for generating ideas. In this case, we're using a form of organization to actually get the ideas flowing. But first, think about your purpose. What is it you are trying to do? Do you need to persuade someone? Are you trying to inform people? Are you trying to warn, recommend, guide, criticize, defend, describe, or inspire? Understanding your purpose will help you decide which ideas to highlight and which to deep six. Once you understand your purpose, try getting out as many ideas as possible. Lay it all on the table. Everything is fair game at this stage. Don't be afraid of things that are off the wall. Just feel free to brainstorm and write down whatever comes to mind. You can evaluate the ideas later. For now, you just want to generate them. But sometimes, this is easier said than done. And that's why we use different tools or techniques for idea generation. One useful technique is mind mapping. To make a mind map, start with one word in the center of a piece of paper. From that word, you're going to create a radial branching system of ideas. What word do you start with? Any general idea or topic you want to explore. Say you're planning your goals for next year. Maybe you start with that word, goals. Now, write a few words around the middle and connect them to that central word with lines. These are major themes that relate to the central idea. So around goals, you might have work, health, financial, and social. Then do the same for each of these major themes. Keep writing new ideas around each new subword until you have a big branching structure around the central word. We also have something called concept maps. Concept maps have a branching structure, like mind maps, but they branch down rather than out. And they illustrate how ideas are connected. Start with an idea at the top in a circle. Then jot down related concepts in circles below. Draw lines to these related concepts, and on those lines, write how the first idea is related to the second. You can use phrases like leads to, or results in, or creates, or just is. For example, imagine you're putting together a presentation about social media. So you write that phrase at the top. Below it, you draw several lines leading to circles. On one line, you write leads to, and in its circle, you put increased communication. From that circle, you draw a line that says contributes to, and a circle with better understanding between coworkers. You see? You're looking at exactly how ideas are related. Besides these mapping techniques, there are some handy charts we can use. A very basic one is a pros and cons list. You may be very familiar with that. Draw a line down the middle of the page and write pros on one side and cons on the other. Pros are positive aspects, while cons are negative aspects. Then there's a SWOT analysis, which is commonly used for evaluating a business idea. SWOT means strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You can write these words in the 4 boxes of a large divided square. Within each box, just crank out as many ideas as possible. All of these techniques have value, and you might want to consider using several of them. One thing to notice is that they all involve writing things down on paper. This is important. You need to get those ideas out of your head and into writing in front of you. It will help you see their relationships, remember them, and organize them later. And it's the organizing side of things we'll talk about next time. That's all for today. If you'd like to test yourself on what we've just covered, have a look at the mybeonline.com website. There you'll find a quiz about today's show, as well as a complete transcript. So long, and see you again soon. Business Skills 360, the podcast that looks at the other side of business English. Hello, and welcome back to the Skills 360 podcast. I'm your host, Tim Simmons, and today I'd like to help you organize your ideas. Before we get into that, a quick reminder that our Business English app for the iPhone and iPad is now available in the App Store. The app comes packed with over 100 great lessons from Business English Pod, including all our Skills 360 lessons. And the best news of all, it's free to download. Just head over to businessenglishpod.com for the App Store link. Okay. Now here's a situation we all find ourselves in. We've got a purpose, and we have a bunch of ideas, and we have to figure out how to make those ideas serve our purpose. Maybe the purpose is to convince your manager that you deserve a promotion, or maybe you want to develop a personal goal plan, or maybe you have to give a presentation to the board about recent technological trends. No matter what your purpose, you can't just rattle off a bunch of ideas one after the other. They need organization, and this is why we take time to prepare. Last week, we looked at several ways to generate ideas. But once you have a big list of ideas, what are you going to do with them? That's what I'll talk about today. You need to start by revisiting your purpose. What is it you're trying to do? Inform, persuade, set goals, warn, recommend? And who are you organizing your ideas for? A group of potential investors? Your boss? A customer or client? Or are the ideas just for yourself? With a clear purpose and audience, you can go through your list of ideas and cross out those that don't really apply. For example, maybe you're trying to convince a customer to switch from the competition to your company. You've brainstormed all the great things about your company and its products. Somewhere in your list is positive workplace culture. That's wonderful. But does a potential customer care? Probably not. So nix it. Great. So you've whittled down your ideas. Now what? Now you need to start combining and grouping what remains. Look at the ideas and see if any themes jump out at you. You may notice that several ideas are linked to one bigger idea, or one big idea in your list seems to include a bunch of smaller ideas in your list. You can rewrite these groupings of ideas on a new piece of paper, or you can just draw lines connecting them. For example, maybe you are going to be introducing your company to a potential foreign partner. You've come up with a big list of ideas related to your business. It includes things like salespeople, products, brand image, executive, history, founder. You peruse this list and see that salespeople, executive, and founder are all people. So you put them in a group. How many groups you end up with will vary, but if you're going to make your ideas work for you, it's good to aim for a manageable number of groups. Most people deal well with 2, 3, or 4. Any more than that, and it becomes more complex and less memorable. Once you've grouped your ideas, explore them a bit more. Remove the ideas that don't really seem to fit perfectly, and try to think of others that you've missed. Strive for balance. You want your groups of ideas to have roughly the same amount of content. In our earlier example, in which you grouped different people together, you might realize you want to throw in others, like researchers and factory workers. And maybe you want to cross out founder because it doesn't seem to gel with your purpose. So, you've got a few groups of ideas or things, and you've made sure that the groups are balanced. Now, try giving these groups short titles. One word is best, though you can use a phrase as well. Try to make them parallel. That is, they should all be phrased the same way. For example, you might have at home, at work, and at the cottage. You could also have them all start with the same letter. For example, we had people as one of the idea groups for introducing your company. Your other groups could be products and places. Doesn't that have a nice ring to it? People, products, and places. That's what you're shooting for. A few groups of related ideas that can be given tight and memorable titles. You start by generating as many ideas as possible. Then you start paring down and grouping them together. Then you explore each group a bit more. And finally, you label them. You're organized and ready to go. That's all for today. If you'd like to test yourself on what we've just covered, have a look at the mybeonline.com website. There you'll find a quiz about today's show, as well as a complete transcript. So long, and see you again soon. Business Skills 360, the podcast that looks at the other side of business English. Hello, and welcome back to the Skills 360 podcast. I'm your host, Tim Simmons, and today I want to look at how you can improve your communication skills. We spend a lot of time looking at different ways that you can make other people understand your ideas. But what about your ability to make sure you understand what other people are saying? Some people say that there's a good reason we have 2 ears but 1 mouth, because we should spend twice as much time listening as we do speaking. And countless business leaders have emphasized the importance of good listening skills as the foundation of good communication. Okay, but listening and understanding are not always easy. We've all found ourselves in situations, it could be a meeting, a presentation, an interview, or a negotiation, where we think, "What did he just say?" Or, "What was that word?" Well, for starters, we need to accept that we might not understand everything. That's not necessarily a problem. But what you do when you don't understand something is what separates a good listener from a bad listener. You see, it wouldn't always be a good idea to stop a speaker and say, "What was that word you just used?" Or, "Can you repeat that sentence?" If you didn't catch something, well, get over it and fast. You don't have time to stop listening and think about what something means. And you don't have time to translate either. You'll get lost, and it will be difficult to get your head back into what you're supposed to be listening to. Instead, you need to grab onto what you do understand, and then fill in what you don't with logical guesses. What you should be shooting for, first and foremost, is the gist of what's being said. That means the main idea or underlying point that the speaker is trying to make. Details will support that main idea, and if you don't catch them all, it's not the end of the world. Okay, but how do we catch the gist? Well, one way is to focus on keywords. Keywords are the words that we understand that show the central message. They provide direct clues to the main idea. So, if you hear someone say, "Blah, blah, blah, new plan, blah, 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 terrible idea, blah, 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 can't support, blah, blah, blah," then you have a good idea what the person is saying without understanding all the blah, blah, blah. If you focus on the blah, 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 however, you might miss those important words that you do understand. Another thing to remember is that people often repeat or explain their ideas further. If you don't understand an idea right away, just be patient. The speaker might explain what she means or give an example, or repeat the idea in different words. But if you get hung up on not understanding the first statement, you risk confusion. Here's an example. Say you're listening to someone give a presentation on the latest sales figures, and he says, "The last quarter was particularly disconcerting." Now, do you know what particularly disconcerting means? If not, don't worry too much, because the speaker will probably go on to explain or give examples. He might say something like this: "Our electronics division was down 13%, mobile was down 16%, and automotive was down a whopping 24%. Now, you can probably guess that particularly disconcerting is negative, right? But if you stopped listening and started racking your brain to figure out what it meant, then you might have missed the explanation. Of course, sometimes there are things that you hear that provoke questions that you need answered. That does certainly happen, and in those situations, the best thing to do is to write them down. You can make a note of a couple of important words, or write down an entire question. Then, you can follow up on the matter later. And because you've written it down for later, you can put it aside at the time and keep listening. So, let's do a quick review of what we've covered here and see how well you were listening. Remember to accept that you might not be able to understand everything. Don't stop listening when something you don't know comes up. Just keep trying to get the gist and the key words. And be patient, because sometimes explanation or repetition can clear things up for us. And finally, make notes if you have to. Now, will these strategies guarantee that you understand everything perfectly? Of course not. Sometimes we need to ask for clarification, and if you tune in next time, you'll hear some tips for doing just that. That's all for today. So long, and see you again soon. Business Skills 360, the podcast that looks at the other side of business English. Hello, and welcome back to the Skills 360 podcast. I'm your host, Tim Simmons, and today I want to continue our look at how you can improve your communication skills. Communication between people is never perfect. Even with the people closest to us, who you might think we can understand very well, there is miscommunication. Sometimes we don't hear things correctly, or we don't hear them at all, and sometimes people don't express ideas precisely. That's enough to complicate the situation. But then we can throw in implied meaning and our own understanding of what's being said indirectly. Add to that the challenges that arise when you're working in your second or third or fourth language, and it might be surprising that we understand each other at all. But have no fear, there are ways to work through the minefield of communication and make everything clear. And that's exactly what we'll look at today. Clarifying what people have said. There are basically two reasons to clarify. First, when we don't know what someone said because we didn't hear them. And second, when we don't know what someone meant because we didn't understand them. Let's begin with clarifying what someone said. When you don't hear someone, you can simply tell them, politely of course. Use diplomatic expressions like, "Pardon me?" or "I'm sorry, but I didn't catch that." Or, "Would you mind repeating that, please?" Avoid short and blunt questions like, "What?" or "What did you say?" These questions seem rude to many people, and when in doubt, too formal is a better mistake than too informal. Now, if you heard what someone said but you don't know what it means, make sure they know that. If you use the expressions we just looked at for when you didn't hear someone, they might just repeat what they said. But if you didn't understand the first time, chances are you won't understand the second time. So how do you make it clear that you haven't understood? Well, avoid just saying, "I don't understand." That feels too blunt and direct. Instead, try, "I'm not sure I follow you." Or, say a speaker uses the expression contingency plan, and you don't know what that means. You can say, "Could you explain what you mean by contingency plan?" Or, "What exactly do you mean by contingency plan?" These kinds of expressions let the speaker know that you haven't understood, not just that you haven't heard. Okay, so in some cases you might think you understand, but you're not sure. So you want to clarify by checking your understanding. The first thing you can do is paraphrase what someone has said and ask for confirmation that your interpretation is correct. Paraphrasing just means saying the same thing, but in different words. And you can do this by acknowledging what someone has said, restating it, and confirming with a tag question. Here's an example. If someone says, we anticipate that the share price will continue to soar. You might say, I see, so you're saying the stock will remain high, right? Or if someone says, our marketing strategy needs a complete overhaul, you can say, okay, you mean we need to change our strategy, right? If you're correct, the speaker will let you know. If you're incorrect, he will explain. Notice that the tag question, right, is a yes or no question. Yes or no questions make it easy for the speaker to confirm your understanding or provide further explanation if you misunderstood. Another technique for clarifying what someone has said is echoing to get confirmation or more explanation. This means repeating the key idea with question intonation. So if someone says, this year's recruitment drive needs to be more aggressive, you might say, it needs to be more aggressive? In this way, you're inviting more detail or examples. And the speaker might come back with, yes, last year we missed our goal. This year, we need to work extra hard to make sure that doesn't happen again. Now you can be sure what the speaker meant. Now, here's a word of warning. Some of the questions we use for clarifying can also be used to cast doubt on someone's ideas or opinions. We act surprised and ask for confirmation to show that we disagree or don't believe what someone has said. Sometimes our intonation makes it clear what our purpose is, but it's often best to make it extra clear by adding something like, just to clarify, or just so I understand here, to the beginning or end of a question. You don't want someone getting bent out of shape because he thinks you disagree with him. Now let's recap. When you don't hear someone, just politely let them know. If you don't understand, tell the person, but don't be too blunt or direct about it. And to avoid misunderstanding or invite greater explanation, you can use paraphrasing or echoing. So, now you've got clarifying techniques to go along with the listening techniques we learned last time. Remember, listening and clarifying go hand in hand. And with these tools and a spirit of understanding, you can improve your communication skills. That's all for today. So long, and see you again soon.